Hello, everyone. This is Daniel Gimario again here for the monthly video blog. And I am here today joined by Silvianne, one member of our council, and will be helping me on this today. We're having some dialogue and she'll help me with the slides. And so we're going to look here at a very important time period in the year, and you'll understand why. If you don't already know, just from world events, we're going to be taking a look at the Middle East horoscope. So we're going to be taking a look at the charts of the countries and at least one of the key players involved in the unfolding dramas that are happening in the Middle East right now. And we're going to start, just as a way of tuning in here, we're going to look at in order to have this, when you watch this later, or if any, because we keep a record of all of these things, over the years, that you can see when it is and what was happening when we made this video blog. So I want to take a look at the events that are happening, what the chart of today is, just for a moment. And it's October 11th where Silvianne is, and October 12th where I am.
Sorry,
yeah.
I know I'm trying, my keyboard seems to be, there we go, not responding. There we go. Okay.
Middle East Astrology, October 2024. And I wanted to just show you the transits for October 11th at 7 p.m. And I mean, we're doing this on a Friday, and this weekend I'm actually going to be writing an in-depth thing regarding the configuration that is really dominant right now, which is the Chiron Sun opposition square Mars. And another reason I wanted to put this up is that for those who are not familiar with the United States chart, which we're going to look at here next, just so you can make reference and remember some of the key features here of what's happening here in mid-October. So you can see where Mars is at around 20 Cancer, Jupiter, which just stationed retrograde at 2119 Gemini, and Pluto, which also just stationed direct, the very final passage through Capricorn, and it's going direct right now. And also notice that where Chiron is, some of these features are going to come up when we look at the other charts. So Chiron, you'll notice, as I mentioned, Sun opposing Chiron. Well, Chiron is 2120 Aries. So I'll keep that in mind, and including the Uranian position, 2636 Taurus, which is going to come into our discussion as we go through. So then let's look at just so we have it as reference here, and we can, when you do your own research on this, and I'm actually looking at our conversation today to be a research project. I will at various points be giving my, quote, opinions and views on this, but for the most part, I'm wanting to show you the charts, and so you can do your own research on it and come to your own conclusions. I'm not trying to impose any particular view or opinion, although I certainly have them, and I'm sure some of them will come through as we go through. So let's take a brief look at the U.S. chart.
And before we do that, Daniel, I just wanted to mention, because you and I sort of randomly chose this time to record this together a couple weeks ago, not thinking about it, and then when we really got close to it, it's just one of those synchronicities that you can't make up, that this is where I am in the evening, Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And that's important, considering what that actually means, what that has meant historically, including the so-called Yom Kippur War of 1973. And there's also been the launching of different kinds of war situations and battle situations at Ramadan also, so I mean, a lot of times there's the use of these Hebrew and Islamic holidays in ways that they were not intended to be used, in my opinion. Okay, so let's look at the U.S. chart. Thank you for bringing that in. That's really interesting. Just as yesterday or the day before, when I did the mentoring group, it happened to be the very day of my own completion of my nodal return metonic point. So that'll come up in our conversation here too, with regards to Israel and Netanyahu. I wonder if I should also record, if I'm able to. I don't know if I can. Well, anyway, this should be fine. So let's look at here we have the US chart, and there's Chiron at 20 Aries, and there will be the exact conjunction happening early next year at the degree where it is now. And you can notice here the Uranus position at 27 Aquarius, where there's a Uranian square to that now. There's the Pluto position. There's the Cancer planets on the U.S. chart, and 13 degrees Sag rising. What I'm using is the esoteric and Rajarian rectification of the Declaration of Independence chart, which, according to Rajar and others, was backdated to actually be this time. It was like the esoteric Declaration of Independence of the United States. I tend to use this one. Other people use other ones. I'm not particularly fond of the constitutional chart because actually that was what gave the opportunity to have the United States be a federal government, rather than a confederation, which was the original intent. That's a whole beyond the scope of our conversation today. But I just wanted you to see these aspects and these configurations relative to when we look at the rest of the charts.
And also that Neptune at 22 Virgo in light of the recent eclipses and that whole thing going on.
And also the fact that the nodal axis, which has been in the latter degrees of Aries Libra, will be on the in November, December, January. It's going to be really close to right on the IC-MC axis of the United States, where the IC, Home and Roots project of the United States, at 2 degrees Aries in the north.
Right. It's been in the early degrees. I mean, it goes backwards. So you said the latter degrees, but yeah.
Well, I meant, yeah.
Yes, I know what you meant.
Ladder meaning ladder in the way that it precesses. Yes.
Right. Just for clarity, I knew you knew what you meant.
And also notice Mars at 21 Gemini. That'll be an important factor too as we go through these other charts. So let's start our investigation of the charts of the key players in the Middle East situation currently. Now, there are a variety of different ways you can look at the charts of countries. So here, what we're choosing to use is the establishment of Israel as a country, which was in 1948, which is also the year of my own birth, 1948. There could be so many other speculations on, like, when was it really birthed? I mean, but how in the world do you come up with a birth chart on that? And actually, for many years, even after this country was established by UN decree, that even the early prime ministers of Israel still referred to where they were as Palestine. And Palestine was and still remains a recognized country by 100. I think I saw the latest list. 134 countries in the UN still recognize Palestine as a country, and it had been a country for a long period of time. My purpose here is not to exhaustively delve into Old Testament history and who were the Israelites and things like that. What did the Bible really say? It depends on what side you're on to determine what the Bible is really saying about it. But I'm using the most recent chart, the one that most people use when they look at a modern day Israel. And some of the things I noticed about this is that in May of this year, they completed their fourth nodal return. The fourth nodal return, which includes the Saturn opposition. So a few years ago, they had the Saturn opposition and the so-called metonic return, which completes the nodal return time frame. The fourth nodal return, third Saturn opposition, happened in May. Now, according to the work of Steiner, in which I've incorporated into my own understanding of life phases, and we could apply that to countries also, that the nodal return time period is like taking an in-breath. It's the start of a whole new thing. Just as when a person is born, it's an in-breath. At 18 to 19, it's an in-breath. At 37 to 38 is an in-breath. 56 to 57, an in-breath. And so it's really 18 to 19-year breaths. And now we're applying this to a country. But let's look at some of the other things here. Certainly what pops out big time is the Uranian transit, Uranus conjunct the sun. Now that is only going to happen every 83, 84 years. So therefore, it's the first time in the life of this country entity, that Uranus has gone over their sun. It also went over their north node a few years ago. So there's a very strong Uranian element. And if you'll notice on the natal chart, the sun is opposite to Chiron, in opposition to Chiron. So there's definitely an element of the Israeli chart that is about the wound, the fracture point, the signature of being wounded, and then how one would digest that wound. Also, I find it interesting, the Venus in Cancer position matches very strongly the U.S. chart Cancerian positions. We also notice, and this is quite intriguing, Leo moon, Mars in Leo, 28-degree Leo, moon in Leo, and then the Pluto, Saturn in Leo, and Mars in Leo. Those that have followed some of the other presentations that we've gone through in the past will remember that there's a tremendous connection between Mars and Leo at 28 degrees and Donald Trump's chart, Mars and Leo, Leo rising. And actually, Trump's embracing of the extreme right-wing radical Zionists. Some of them say, "Well, we think of you as the king of Israel," which is really interesting, and we'll find another version of that when we look at Netanyahu's chart. So keep in mind this 28 Leo, which also is in the Iranian complex here. Because it's Chiron square Mars opposite the sun. So it's a Uranian amplification of the sun square Mars, which just happens to also be an aspect that's happening over these next few days. The transits of sun square Mars taking place, all right, with Chiron. Interesting. I'm just, one of the really fun things for me, Silvianne, when I do these is I'll notice things that I had not noticed, when I was doing my research notes on this. Very intriguing. And then also there is a Jupiter transit to the Mercury position. And then actually Jupiter will, of all things, reach Uranus. So Jupiter amplifying Uranus, and we could even say that cycle has already begun when at the point that that Jupiter reached 19. You know, from the point that Jupiter went retrograde at 19 up until the time that the Jupiter goes past the 24th degree. And then after that is Jupiter transit Venus. So one
And,
could.
and that also made me notice that, natally, Jupiter is opposing Uranus in this chart.
True,
So
right.
it's
As
so
all of
it's
us,
hitting
all of
that
us,
off too. Yeah.
all of us had that in 1948.
Right.
I had the Jupiter Uranus at 0 Cancer opposite Jupiter at about 24 Sag. It's kind of one of our 1948 signatures. Um, then also, you know, if we looked at this from a shamanic astrology perspective, a TOTAMS paradigm perspective, let's look at the storylines here. It's the Taurus job in the Leo tribe, which is the pleasure of being king, the pleasure of running things, I guess you could say, of orchestrating, carrying a vision, and then doing whatever you want and getting off on that, you know. And that's certainly what they've done ever since they've been at the state of Israel, um, in concert, obviously, with the United States. And then we have, for the storyline for current life purpose, the Scorpio job in the Libra tribe. Now, this one is very interesting. And I mean, we could look at that as far as what the intent of it is, which would be to collaborate, you know, which would be to go into negotiation, to go into, you know, respecting the views of others, you know. I mean, that's what the goal of that storyline would be. But what is the shadow of the Scorpio job in the Libra tribe? It's we call it sometimes the silver tongued devil. You know, the person who is going to say whatever it is they want the others to hear. I'm thinking of other Libra risings. I cannot help but chuckle when I look at this, because there's another person in this very moment who has the Scorpio job in the Libra tribe, and that would be me. You know, so I sometimes get quite a chill going through me sometimes when I'm considering both the shadow and the light side of this. You know, what the intent of this storyline would be. Um, and then, of course, Moon conjunct Pluto natally is the shadow of too much Leo. You know, considering oneself to be special among all others. You know, so all of those are like written into this particular horoscope, interestingly enough. So why don't we next look at the father and the mother of his country, Netanyahu himself, all right, who is in still his fourth nodal return. Look at the degree of Saturn at 15 Virgo. You know, so he is directly in his Saturn opposition at this time period, which is intended to be a maturation point. You know, there's the first one at the puberty. There's the second one at age 44 to 45 in that zone. And then there's this one, you know, so it's a change of gears into a different phase of life. That would be the intent of it, as well as what I shared about the nodal return process. Then what else do we notice here? Well, we'll look at Mars, 26 Leo, also very close to Pluto. We also find an even greater Libran signature here, Moon and Sun in Libra. And I certainly want to point out here that on his chart, we have the Chironic, we have Chiron transiting Chiron opposing the Moon. You know, so basically that T-square situation of Chiron opposing the Sun square Mars is very strongly that current transit aspects this big time. Not to speak of also the nodal axis, where we have the north node at 16, south node at 16, Libra. And that's the reason why it's there is, of course, he's still in the nodal return process. So the eclipses of this year and early next year are close to these positions. He has recently gone through Pluto cycle to his sun, but that is over. However, we could also remember here that the sun in Libra is squared by the U.S. Pluto at 27 Capricorn, squaring the sun in Libra of the Netanyahu's chart. The other things that we could say about this, we also, if I'm talking about Saturn, there is going to be, like on the natal, what did I make a note of there? The Uranus, might be a wrong note that I took. So we have the Saturn opposing Saturn. Oh, Saturn conjunct the IC, which I think is an extremely important thing. And as we were talking about ahead of time, we're going to see a lot in these charts of this area of Pisces Virgo. And here's one example of it, where Saturn is on the IC. Now the Saturn is only going to be on an individual's or a country's chart about every 30 years. So this is a confrontation with barriers and boundaries and a chance to mature and evolve to another level regarding what do you do and where do you do it from? You know, like basically it's he's like kind of representing, I am Israel. And you can actually see the reason why he might say that. The Libran connections with the Israel chart, the Mars and Leo, but then also the fact that he's in a Saturn 30-year initiatory window to the home and roots of his own chart. And depending on how you want to look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, he knows that if somehow he doesn't maintain power, he'll be in prison. You know, so basically he's desperately trying to hold on to what power he has. And he's in an alliance with the far right, radical Zionist clerics that are in the government. If he loses their support, if he doesn't continue to get their support, he will not be prime minister. So I think he's in a kind of a space of desperation. You know, the desire to have a greater Israel, and this will come up a little bit when we look at Lebanon's chart and Palestine's chart. Now, if we looked at it from a shamanic astrology perspective, go back to the Netanyahu chart for a moment before we look at that. So what do we have here? We have for current life intent, it's the Leo job in the Sagittarius tribe. And that actually turns out to be the exact same storyline that Donald Trump had in his lineage. the Leo job in the Sagittarius tribe. And here we have Chiron on Venus and the ascendant. And while the goal of a chart that would be the Aquarius, what am I trying to say here? The moon and the south node and Neptune and Mercury are in the 11th house. So in his lineage, it was the Aquarius job in the Libra tribe. You know, so he can present himself as being diplomatic. In fact, he had been very diplomatic. I mean, he was actually kicked out of office earlier in his career because he negotiated with Hamas, you know. But that he's become very much on the other side, you know, very hard liner since then. And is it possible for him to be a visionary leader? I'm not sure. His vision at this point is a greater Israel, which means to include Lebanon and parts of Syria and parts of Egypt and to expand the boundaries of that had been allocated to the state of Israel by the United Nations. Um, so there's a lot of tension going on in this chart, and one can readily see it based on the aspects that are taking place, including the very same Uranian square to Mars, that unexpected, unpredictable. I would say that he's unbelievably unpredictable at this particular time due to the pressure he's under, and also due to whether he can actually allow himself to move into a different phase of life, or to just hold on to his kingly status. So keep this chart in mind as we go through our investigation. Did you notice anything I might have missed here? Actually, I'm just thinking of something else too, Silvianne, which is the Saturn transit, which I've mentioned, the Saturn opposing Saturn timeline cycle he's in, is also squaring the ascendant descendant. So the ascendant 9, Venus 12. So there's the Saturn squaring that part of the chart over these last months, and going up until, I mean, a critical turning point is when Saturn goes direct at 12, which would be right at the square to Venus. So that
he also has Jupiter transiting his descendant.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I thank you for reminding me of that one. That's also very interesting relative to the Mars position on the United States chart. If I gave an idealistic interpretation of what the point of this would be, Jupiter on the descendant, Saturn square Venus, inner sacred marriage work. Where basically he would be able to somehow get guidance. Who is Venus in Sag? Sophia. It's the wisdom aspect of the feminine. And I'm not noticing any women on his war cabinet. I don't know what guidance he might be coming from Christos Sophia at this point. I mean, actually, most of the Zionists are atheists anyway. They don't even believe in God. So they're sort of radical in that sense. So I think he presents himself as being Orthodox, but he was born in a secular family. I can't help but think a lot about this guy because I remember him when he was during the. I was 19 years old during the 6-Day War, and he had just left his. He had left the U.S., where he graduated from high school in the U.S. I think it was in. Might have been in New Jersey somewhere. I'm not remembering, but and he went to Israel, and he joined the military and was a captain during the 6-Day War at 19, and he was the face of the 6-Day War when I was watching the results of the 6-Day War when I was 19 years old. And then by 1973, he then was, of course, pretty much running the Israeli military for the Yom Kippur War. And he's been in and out of the government. He's been like a face of Israel from ever since I can remember as a teenager. And
interesting, it would have been his first nodal return on his North Node in Aries.
Ding, yes, absolutely. That's exactly right. It would have been he joined the military, rose up to be the face of the military at that point at the age of 18 to 19 when he left and went back.
Go Aries. Yeah.
What I was reading on his wiki page is that one reason he said I have to get out of America was because that he did not feel comfortable with the counterculture movement that was happening in his high school. Basically the what he would consider to be well, everything associated with the counterculture at that particular point. And he said, I'm out of here. I can't stand this. So he had to get back to Israel, become military, and fight the 6-Day War. Interesting character, and again, I get the shivers when I look at the chart, to the moon and sun in Libra, you know. But here a reminder that it's also deeply connected at Mars and Leo, and the Leo rising position of Donald Trump's chart, as well as the Sagittarian connections to his chart. So anyway, I won't go any further with that. Let's just take a
I don't know
look.
if you,
You put a bi-wheel, I think, next year, just so people have
yeah,
reference to that.
you can see this.
And also, I mentioned the, the the Cancerian. No, that the Venus in Cancer position is like the U.S. Cancer, Venus, and Sun position.
Yeah, that's Israel. And it's only looking at this that I see his Uranus is exactly conjunct Israel's Venus.
Right. Yeah, I see. I'm during the course of my astrological work, I've never done bi-wheels. You know, I've always just put it together in my mind. So right, I mean, I'm not always easily remembering which is on the inner and which is on the outer. But the Venus and that Venus in Cancer on Israel's chart, I think I mentioned that when we were looking at Israel's chart. Okay.
And you made that reference at, kind of jokey reference at the beginning. And when I looked at this, of course, the first thing I saw was that his asteroid goddess Ceres in Libra is exactly conjunct the ascendant of Israel. Yeah. So, my comment we were speaking, originally was
the mother of the country.
The mother of the country, right, as well as the father.
As being the king of the country, right?
Right. He's mothering it. Okay. So Iran up next.
Yeah, sure. Now this is, again, we have to speak as to what chart do we use. I mean, obviously Iran, that area, I think it's a country at this point.
Sorry.
80 or 90. You had, I was going to do Iran first. Okay.
Yeah, you did. It flipped back. Sorry, that wasn't on purpose. Still getting used to my new computer.
We're using the 1979 chart, which was the chart that was the current Iran uses. But I mean, there's been so many different time periods in their history. I mean, they go all the way back to the Persia is a very ancient culture, and it's a country of 80 or 90 million people, with many of the great world religions were sourced there. And actually, it's quite a developed country. And this happened when the Shah, the U.S.-backed Shah, was overthrown, and established their independence away from under the control of the United States. Of course, the Shah was put into power in Iran after the CIA orchestrated coup of the democratically elected socialist president of Iran earlier. There's no dispute on that. And so somehow Iran has now become the one of the axis of evil, or so, but based on the neocons in the United States government. But if we look at the natal chart here, there's a very interesting story it tells. The lineage is the Cancer job in the Taurus tribe. Stability and a concern for their country. And we could say that would be a very, if we looked at it as on any individual horoscope, pardon me, the Cancer job in the Taurus tribe would be a very, quote, conservative signature. Yes, I know it's an Aries, but it's a sun sign in Aries. But in our paradigm, we use the other features of the chart more than the sun sign if the sun sign is not the main feature. And so it's a very conservative horoscope, even the Mars position in Pisces. And when we look at actually how they have behaved under the constant denigration and demonization by the United States government, um, they've actually been quite restrained. What I feel about how they're behaving, this could all be proven wrong in the next week from when we're talking here. But they've been very restrained because they really want to preserve their country, preserve their people. That whole strike that they did as a response to Israel's genocide on Lebanese and particularly Gaza was orchestrated. That was actually something they knew the U.S. told Israel it was coming. It was back channels said that would take place, and it was more like, okay, let's try to do this in such a way that I mean, even the drone strike that happened before was orchestrated. It was all done in such a way that the mass of the Iranians who wanted revenge, to say, well, please, if we go too far with this, we might get nuked, and so they're essentially trying to preserve their country. That's why they've been very conservative and restrained, and much to the chagrin of other like the Lebanese and Syrians, and particularly the people in Gaza. Why are they so restrained? And I think the chart describes why they have been. And then they have the Capricorn job, North Node in the 10th house, and Sagittarius rising. In a previous thing I wrote, I was looking at how that seventh, eighth, the zone of 7 to 10 degrees Sagittarius shows up on so many of the key players in this whole drama, including a lot of political figures. The chart, and even Jupiter in Cancer, and Iran is going into their Jupiter return. So I think they're playing a long game here. They really don't want to have their country destroyed. And a lot of the propaganda about Iran is really just like, oh, I'll just give you one example. 70% of the graduates in technology in Iran in their universities are women. So I mean, which is really intriguing considering the propaganda about there's so anti-women there. So we need a balanced or nuanced view on this. But then we have Pluto at 18 Libra. So Pluto at 18 Libra is, of course, right on those Libra points on on Israel and Netanyahu's chart. The other than the Plutonian connection to Israel's chart, if we just simply, as a standalone, looked at Iran's chart, everything on it is pretty conservative, including even Venus in Pisces, Venus and Mars in Pisces, everything in the 4th house, Mercury in Pisces. It certainly is a signature of quite a conservative, but also country-loving. They love their own people. I know there can be controversy about that. I mean, it is a Islamic country, and there has been reports of them suppressing, Christians and Baha'is and so on. But I think their main motive is to preserve Iran, and that's why they have been less overtly involved in going up against Israel, even though Israel certainly wants them to have been prodded to respond, so the U.S. would get more involved and be involved in an attack on Iran. And the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are both in lockstep regarding we need to nuke Iran, we need to bomb Iran. I mean, it goes back to those speeches given by John McCain. Bomb, 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 bomb Iran. Basically, it was just so jingoistic and ridiculous, actually, in my opinion. So I'm just giving some commentary there also, but my view here is for you to take a look at these charts and come to your own conclusions, including the transits. And here we have on the Iran chart, there's Saturn. Iran is at age 45, so they are in their Saturn opposition phase. And in fact, there we have Saturn on the IC, Saturn on the South Node, and Saturn Saturn opposite Saturn is a cycle that they've been in. They also will shortly be reaching their Metonic age 46 to this up to the Saturn square. And actually, when I'm looking at it right now, what am I trying to say here? Not the, sorry, the Saturn opposition, and then the Metonic, which comes up as 17 Pisces. So the North Node will be on the South Node mid next year, right around the time period that they'll start their Jupiter return in Cancer. That starts in June. Let me just check for a moment here. They're age 40.
And but first it'll be hitting all these other things in Pisces, the Mercury, the Mars.
Indeed, yes. The Metonic point happens August, September, October, during that second eclipse season of 2025. Yeah, that's when the Metonic cycle within the shift of gears into a new phase of life. I mean, if we were looking at this as a chart of a person, that time frame of the Saturn opposition to the Metonic point, the nodal reversal and the Metonic would be the movement from the summer phase of life to the fall phase of life. And it seems to me they're very dedicated and committed to play the long game and to have another phase of life, you know, rather than to get involved in biblical great battles at the end of time, you know, which is what one view of the situation happening in the Middle East is.
And I was so struck by the coincidence that Netanyahu's MCIC is in the exact same degree as Iran's MCIC in, you know, Virgo Pisces, the sacred work, and
yeah, it's a complete up against the wall. How do we preserve our vision of what our country is? You know, and it's objective. Saturn at that point is either what's working or what isn't working. I mean, depending on where you're coming from on this, one could interpret it as the end of the complete destruction, hitting the wall entirely of Israel, or depending if you come from a different perspective, the end and, you know, hitting the wall for Iran. You know, it's pretty strange how they both those cycles line up like that. Of course, Neptune has been involved in a similar area also, but it's the Saturn transit that seems to be so important here. And also the same Uranian. Look at the moon at 28 Taurus. You know, so it's a time frame of these next the last portion of the Uranian transit through Taurus is squaring the moon of Iran.
Conjunct the moon.
Yes.
Conjunct. Yeah.
Thank you. This is why I love having you here with me. I misspoke on that. So what would one say then, as far as what might happen there, that unexpected events that might stand in the way of their desire to preserve the status quo? You know, like unexpected events, like some sort of limited nuclear strike of some kind, you know, wiping out their, Israel's been like chomping at the bit to have a chance to do that, actually. Maybe they're not taking Iran seriously enough. because they really do want to preserve their country. No country, none of those countries have ever done preemptive strikes to take out a country. It's the U.S. doctrine is preemptive self-defense. Okay. See if I left anything
Yeah.
out there. Oh, just that the eclipses also, you brought up this the interesting factor that there is the Saturn relationship with these degrees of Virgo and Pisces. Well, that also happens to be the eclipses of the second eclipse season of 2024, and then the first eclipse season of 2025, 23 and 25 Pisces Virgo. So clearly the eclipse seasons have a great deal to do with the unfolding of what happens to these two countries.
And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the US Neptune is at 22 degrees Virgo.
Right.
So.
And that is associated with the often spoken of by me of the Neptune square Mars in Gemini on the U.S. chart, which I think is one of the main symbols on the U.S. chart for the uniparty pretending to be two parties, where red becomes blue, blue becomes red. They keep shifting back and forth, and so they become a uniparty.
Which means the U.S. Mars is conjunct Iran's descendant.
Right.
Oh.
Or close to it.
Yeah.
What is it? It's 16, 18 Gemini.
Yeah,
No,
it's
20,
just a little further.
21 Gemini.
Yeah.
21 Gemini.
And just in the interest of time, we're getting close to how much time you said you wanted to spend. So.
Not quite. I'm looking at the time.
Okay. Okay, good.
And so here we have Lebanon's chart. Now, of course, this is what a lot of people don't know, and this is really close to my own heart, because probably the most influential movie that ever happened to me when I was a young boy was the movie Lawrence of Arabia. And I ended up reading everything I could about that, including his T.H. Lawrence's own writings. He went to, in World War I, he went to the Middle East as a British agent in order to unite the Arabs against the Turks, which the idea was to expel the Turks. And actually, he ended up totally loving the idea of Arab unity and to free those countries. And he had this march into Damascus. And at that time, the plan was to have a greater Syria, and Palestine and Syria and Lebanon would all become what's called Greater Syria. But unfortunately for him and for the Arabs at that point, France and Britain divided it up, chopped it up in different ways. And so actually Lebanon was like a French protectorate for a long period of time, while other parts like Palestine was then a British protectorate. And they divided it up in artificial borders and everything. And this is real interesting when you look at Israel's plan for a greater Israel, which is actually to have Israel be what had originally been Greater Syria, so it's very, very, very interesting. But what happened in 1943, they finally were granted their independence fully, and that's what this chart is. And so here we have, looking at it in a way we do in this paradigm, it's the Virgo job in the Virgo tribe. And look at the 20-degree point of Virgo. I mean, here we have more Saturn stuff happening there. And Virgo rising. And what I find interesting is that it's Mars in Gemini. Now, the thing that a lot of people don't know about Lebanon was an extremely successful attempt at putting together diverse peoples in one small country. About 30% of the country is Shia Muslim, about 30% is Sunni Muslim, and about 30% is Christian Orthodox, as well as some other kinds of Christians. And they were getting along with each other until an attempt continues to be made to separate these other countries around Israel, one against the other. So what's happening here with Lebanon? The diversity could be thought of as the Mars and Gemini. It also has Venus and Libra. I mean, they basically have um, tried to survive as a country, but here's that Jupiter in Leo situation where Jupiter is actually on all of those Leo placements that we've looked at before. And from what I know of the situation, they were the ones who were trying to negotiate, and actually the main guy who wanted to negotiate, he was given permission. Actually, the Israelis and the Americans basically said, "Yeah, we're gonna go ahead with negotiations." And then, of course, the next day he was killed by the bombing. So every attempt to have negotiations that come from uh, Hamas, Lebanon, Hezbollah is basically the neocons and also Netanyahu do not want it. They basically their project is to expel the Aboriginal people, the indigenous people, and to have it be a settler colonialism. Now, that's how I perceive it anyway. But this is also a time period for them where actually on the Lebanon chart, it's also a Uranian time period. Because look at the sun, 28 Scorpio. So the very, very same Uranian thing, which is also on the US chart, squaring the US moon. So I think Uranus and Saturn are really the main agents when we look at all these charts at the same time. The Jupiter transit is also going through over the midheaven and Vesta and Mars, and then reaching Saturn. So if we looked at it from the perspective of the possibilities inherent for Lebanon surviving as a country, I would say that they have a good shot at it. They're not going to be swallowed up in settler colonialism, despite all the attempts to separate the different communities there. Also, I did notice something. What makes me say this is that I did look up the progressed positions, the progressed moon position on all these charts, and what really stood out to me was the progressed moon of Lebanon is exactly on their ascendant. So that leads me to believe that they will in fact survive, regardless of all the strikes that have happened, the killing of the Hezbollah leaders, the incursion into southern Lebanon, and the destruction and the killing of civilians in Beirut, and the whole thing. My sense when I look at this chart is that they will survive as a country. That's as close as I ever will get to doing some kind of prediction. But you come to your own conclusions as when you look at the particular at the chart, the original intent of the chart, which is the Pisces job in the Virgo tribe, which to me is attempting the project of weaving together diverse communities into a pattern that had worked for a very long period of time in that part of the world. And it also goes without saying how much is in ancient Lebanon, that ancient area that goes all the way back to the Phoenicians, all the way back to like the original seafaring culture, and the forests of Lebanon were just famous for the building of the fleets of boats that the Phoenicians used. So there's so much ancient, rich history in both Iran and Lebanon. Okay, last but not least.
I don't know, this is my sacred geometry mind, just looking at this. I know we don't talk about it a lot, but they got two trines that form, a Star of David, basically in air and fire, and a lot of those positions you were just talking about, especially if you take that midpoint between so anyway, that kind of goes along with your analysis, I think.
That there's an inherent earthy stability to what that land area has represented. And despite how many wars have gone through there, I mean, it's kind of like the Sacred Heart of the Levant. You know, that whole particular area, in my sense. Uh, I have not had the opportunity in all my travels to ever go there, but I've always wanted to go to Baalbek. You know, the massive megalithic structure that is there that yeah, is even beyond attempting to figure out how they did the pyramids. You know, I mean, it's just a remarkable thing that's there that is a holdover from those that came from before. And last but not least is the chart of Palestine itself. Now, again, it's another one of these that you can't even. How do you have a chart of this area? Um, but this is the chart of the establishment of the state of Palestine, which, as I mentioned before, is recognized by over 100 countries. And it's centered in the West Bank, but it allegedly includes the Gaza and the other areas of what's the remnants of ancient Palestine before Israel was created. Virgo rising, the Libra job in the Virgo tribe for current life intent, 28-degree Capricorn moon, which is the Aries job in the Capricorn tribe, is a lineage. And it certainly speaks to the survival capacities, you know, of the strength of those people where their infrastructure is almost entirely destroyed. Um, and it's you cannot kill off an indigenous structure that believes in the sacredness of their land and their people. And it was, but you can also see they've been in a heavy Pluto cycle, you know, Pluto to the Capricorn moon, which is certainly challenging. I mean, it's like conditions beyond their control, chaos beyond imagination that has happened to also the West Bank. Um, and you can also see why there's an alliance between the state of Palestine and Lebanon. I mean, the connect, and here we have yet another place of where it's that, here we have that 25 Virgo rising, 25 Pisces on the descendant, Saturn cycle to the south node, to the north node, sorry, the north node, and then up in front of us is the unfolding of the remainder of the Saturn cycle to the ascendant-descendant axis. And also Jupiter coming up to be on the midheaven. Somehow, I think that also Palestine survives, you know, when I look at this. We also see other connections. Venus in Libra is that 19-degree point, which is in connection to the Sun, Mars, Chiron alignment we've looked at before, as well as having a connection to Netanyahu and to the Israel chart. So we're putting this all out there as fodder for research. We have to also mention that, yes, the Mars position, the masculine principle on the chart of Palestine, Mars and Aries. But for them to survive, they need help from others. And that's why the North Node is in the 11th, it's in the 7th house. So it's like they can't do it all themselves, which is what the Aries job in the Capricorn tribe would be thinking they should be able to do. There's a great deal of tenacity and stubbornness in that combination. But it's Libra job in the Virgo tribe, and certainly it would show up between this chart and Lebanon's chart, which is the natural alliance between those two. And do we once again look? Uranus has been involved.
So I was just going to say that Uranus has been opposite all their Scorpio. Yeah.
The Palestine chart is, I had made a note on this, and this will be the last thing I want to bring in. So they're the youngster here. You know, they will soon turn 36. And so they've recently gone through a Jupiter return a little farther back. Do I have that right? No, actually, they're actually
No, they just recently
still,
there. Yeah.
yeah, they're technically still in the Jupiter return and Jupiter on the midheaven, which is one of the reasons why I think that somehow they will continue on and survive. The Mars in Aries is certainly suggesting that they're fighters. There certainly are fighters, and with a tenacity and a strength, and they've been buffeted by Uranus and by Pluto on top of their moon position, so it's definitely a crisis of survival, like conditions utterly beyond their control. And even Saturn up to the descendant, and then also next year when that big shift that happens next year when Saturn and Neptune go into Aries. And we also have the North Node on Mars coming up here. So there seems, how can we say this? A lot on the table here. And look at the charts, keep track of the transits that are happening, even these next 3 or 4 days.
And just one thing, Daniel, this is another signature of the Mars square Chiron, only the signs are reversed from how it is in the transits right now. Mars in Aries and Chiron in Cancer.
Right, right. Yes. Yep. With the nodes then lining up.
Right. And that re-envisioning of what is the ideal Aries warrior,
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
Well, certainly there is an element of it that when you're dealing with middle world stuff, which is the protector, the protector. I mean, we can idealize and say, from a progressive Libran perspective, negotiation, and also to not succumb to the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of thing. And I pray for the powers that shouldn't be, as well as if we have any visionary leaders, to actually attempt to not fall into all out war, and to not feel that you have to fulfill a version of biblical prophecy, and then unfortunately a lot of the Christian Zionists say the reason they've allied with the Zionists in Israel is because they think that it's the only way for Christ to return, is to have the great battle. That's only one interpretation of Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelations. There's a whole other way of looking at it. So who knows what's going to happen? I sure don't. I have my own how I feel about it, which I'm not attempting to convince anybody out there who has different views, but to just look at the charts and apply the logic of our paradigm, looking at the archetypes, looking at the connections, and more than anything, the cycles that these planets and these countries and Netanyahu himself are going through at this particular time. Beyond the scope of this, which is why I want to reference back to the vlogcast I did with Lizzie last month, which was looking at the charts of the US presidential candidates and the technocrats that are, in my view, behind the workings of both parties. And so that was what we did last month. So these two kind of operate together. You can actually put them together. So I think that's about as far as we want to take it today, Silvianne. Thank you for staying with me on this and noticing when when riffing on this, where I might.
Okay.
It's funny because it's the very same thing that my former colleague used to do all the time. She said, Daniel, no, you said it this way, but it was the other way. Which is really good. You're doing a great job. I really appreciate it, Thanks for helping out.
It's
On that.
it's my Aries moon square to your Capricorn moon square. It's
Right use of
sparky.
that square. Right use of that square, and with your confidence to jump in and point these things out. I really do truly appreciate it. So thank you.
I appreciate you too.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Um,
I always learn something from this. So yeah.
as do I. So until next time, and just as for those that are watching this beforehand, coming attractions is next week is the special topics highlight seminar, which will be on men's challenges, which I will have the pleasure of doing that one with Lizzie, and so maybe I'll see some of you out there for that. Good for now. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.